Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu, and I'm back with another episode of Road to Revival. For those who don't know, last week I covered all of the new cards that got announced, and I'm going to cover all of the ones that got announced this week. We got quite a bit of rebuddies announced. Some of them we knew were already coming, we just didn't have their effects, and now we have their effects. But let's just talk about the ones that we do know. So first up, we have Sound Speed Jailer Helle Gepard Rebuddy. So basically what he does is he's another Executioner card, so he wants cards in your drop zone. So if you have 20 or more Executioners in your drop zone, all Executioners can't be destroyed, returned to hand, and their abilities can't be nullified by your opponent's card effects. Helle Gepard is basically a really solid card for the deck because of the protection he gives. On top of that, he has a really good counter effect. Helle's Eye, if 10 or more Executioners are in your drop zone, you can call up to 2 of them with different names from your drop zone without paying their call cost, and their size is reduced to 0 until they leave the field. And you can only use this ability once per turn. It's a really powerful effect because there's a lot of good card synergies that you could use this with. You could use it with the Impact monster to basically get a free counter call on the Impact monster. You could even use this with the new Tanuki Rebuddy, so that way you could get his attack effects off. Like, there's just a lot you could do with this ability, and the fact that he also gives protection really makes him a very solid inclusion in the Searing Executioner deck. Next, we have Wind Faerie Sylph Rebuddy, a little bit of Faerie and Weisersekal synergy. So when this card enters the field, search for up to one Weisersekal or Faerie item and reveal it to your opponent and shuffle your deck. So she basically will search for almost any item. And then she also has the added benefit of when this card attacks, drop the top card of your deck, and if that card is a Weisersekal or Faerie, you may put the card into your hand, and if you do, you deal 1 damage to the opponent. So she's also acting a little bit like card draw. There's just a whole bunch of synergy between the drop zone and the deck, and she's just doing a lot, but I don't necessarily think that she is going to reshape the current Weisersekal decks. So she's just a really good support and inclusion to the existing one. Next, we have Bladewing Phoenix Rebuddy. So this is kind of playing off of what Bladewing Phoenix has kind of just been doing. So it plays off of both the Adventurer and Dungeon Enemy archetypes. And he has a really good counteract effect where you can call him from your hand for free on top of a Dungeon Enemy or Adventurer. So that's just really good, getting a free counter call. And then he has another counter effect. During your turn, you may put an Adventurer and a Dungeon Enemy from your drop zone to the bottom of your deck, a little bit of recycling. And if you do, you get to basically charge 2 and draw 1. And he gets a ginormous power boost and quadruple attack. And this is a soft once per turn. So it's just looking to be like a very powerful card, because ideally if you have enough Bladewing Phoenixes in your hand, you could be like, oh, I'm going to attack, use his ability, recycle 2 back to my deck, and then gauge 2, draw 1, do it again, call another Bladewing Phoenix on top. So like, he's definitely a pretty good card, and he's doing a lot for the deck he currently goes into. He kind of goes into his own little makeshift deck, and it got a lot of support with the Blazing Overclash cards. I don't necessarily think it's going to be a hyper-competitive deck, but it's definitely a fun deck just to mess around with. So he's definitely going to go in that, and he's just looking to be another pretty solid support card. Next, we have Martian UFO Takosuke Rebuddy. So this is one of the few superheroes with Ride instead of Transform. So that's something to keep in note. So that's something to keep in mind. And then he also has a pretty interesting ability, Taco Zap Beam. So during a player's attack phase, you could pay 1 life, And if you do, you basically get to call a card type, and then your opponent reveals their hand. And if you called it correctly, you deal 2 damage to your opponent. And then if they just so happen to have 3 or more of the correct call, then you also get to draw 2 cards. So that's just pretty strong, considering I don't necessarily think it's very hard to call the correct answer, because the game is just so spell heavy. Most of the time you're just going to call spell, and they're just going to have 3 spells in their hand. Like, there's a very high statistical probability of 3 spells being in your opponent's hand. So dealing 2 damage and drawing 2 cards is already pretty good. The fact that he's a superhero means he has a lot of the new superhero synergies. So you could utilize some of the new Jack cards. You could utilize the new Hero World Garga. There's just a lot of different interesting things you could do with the fact that he's a superhero and he does ride. But outside of that, he's not really doing anything super special, but I do think he could possibly spawn a new, like, more generic superhero deck based on his ability. Because he doesn't necessarily fit into anything currently, but he also could be a pretty good splash card for some other Hero World decks. Next we have Evil in Heart Yamigitsune Rebuddy. So Skull Warriors are finally getting their support, and he's looking to be a pretty interesting card, but the only problem with him is he's kind of already competing with himself. So in Buddy Lineage, he got another really, really powerful Yamigitsune form, and like, he's just competing with himself, which is both a good thing and a bad thing, but regardless, it's just a pretty solid card. So what he's doing is all Skull Warriors basically get Shadow Dive when he's on the field. That's really strong, because attacking through the center, like, depending against the deck, is just a really strong effect. And then he has another effect: when a Skull Warrior you control attacks alone, damages your opponent takes can't be reduced. Skull Warriors, when they're attacking alone, he basically makes it so they have to eat the damage, or you are going to have to try to nullify the attack. And then he has the To Darkness ability. When a Skull Warrior deals damage to your opponent, you may destroy that card. If you do, put the top card of your deck into your gauge, gain 1 life, and draw a card. So he's also acting as a little bit of a resource engine. He's just looking to be pretty interesting, and I think he's going to either change the Skull Warrior deck or, like, kind of form a branch in the Skull Warrior deck between the different Yamigitsunes, because him and the Bunny Lineage one are just both really, really solid cards. So they could exist in the same deck. It's just they're doing a little bit of different things, because the other Yamigitsune is attacking the opponent's resources, and this one is gaining you resources. So just in the difference in playstyle alone can kind of make one a little bit better than the other in certain situations. And then we're probably going to end up getting a first Omnilord Rebuddy, so depending on what he does, also can change the Skull Warrior deck. Speaking of Omnilords, we got the 5th Omni Dragonlord Tenbu Rebuddy. He's another Omnilord, so he can go into any world, and if you're playing Dragon World, then you can run 4 of him, otherwise you're locked at 1. What's really powerful is his effect and his interactions with Drum. So if you have a Drum monster on your field, his size is reduced by 3, and then whenever you're dealt damage, you can choose any number of cards on your opponent's field with power less than 50,000 and destroy the chosen card. And then he's got double attack and Soul Guard. So for the current 5th Omnilord deck, this card's actually useless. It basically is a size 0 double attacker with Soul Guard that is an armor dragon. Everything in 5th Omnis currently basically is a size 0 because of Arcade, both of the arcades, either the Super Cavalier or the SD. It doesn't necessarily matter which one is making your stuff size 0. It's just the fact that your stuff is already being size 0, so it doesn't really matter that he reduces his size because all of your stuff's already size 0. On top of which, between both the new Mugen Drum and the old Mugen Drum, you're just going to take 1 point of damage and then destroy 2 things on the opponent's field. Well, they only have 3 monster slots realistically. There are a couple of decks that have more, but like that's kind of moot when the average is going to be 3, and most of the time they're not even going to utilize all 3. So between both of the drums on the field, they could just both pop the opponent's monsters, if the opponent's monsters are even able to be popped, because there's so much protection running around that like it's not uncommon for them to have their basic protections before you even get to this card. So like his destruction ability is nice, and his interaction with just drum is pretty good, but I don't think he's going to fit into the 5th Omni deck, and he might go into like a different deck with drum because it does just have that interaction, and there's different ways to deal damage to yourself. I don't really think this card's going to be doing a whole lot, but he could. And then speaking of Omni Lords again, we have the second Omni Lord, Demon Lord Asmodai Rebuddy. So Asmodai already had a Rebuddy, so it was just kind of interesting the fact that his Omni Lord version got a Rebuddy. So this is just continuing what I said before and leading me to believe that all of the Omni Lords are going to get a Rebuddy. What's really powerful is the fact that he is an Omni Lord, so he could go into basically every single deck. And what makes him even better is the fact that if you just have a set spell, if you just have a card with set on your field, his size gets reduced by 3. So he's a giant like wall that can fit into almost any deck because a lot of decks use set cards. So that's already pretty good. On top of which, if this card would leave the field, you can discard 2 cards and he remains on the field. So that protects him against time dragons, that protects him against being just straight up dropped from Vanity Husk, and then on top of which he has 4 crit, penetrate, double attack, and counterattack. So there's just a whole bunch of different things you could do with him. I think he's definitely a really good card that can go into a lot of different decks. Next, we have Blade Beast of Blinder, Mikazuki Rebuddy. Blade Beasts is very, very special to my heart, and I really, really enjoy Blade Beast. So when this card got announced, I was super, super pumped and excited, and I already started doing some testing and deck editing. So I definitely think that this new Rebuddy card puts Blade Beasts on the map and makes them maybe not super competitive, but like it makes them good enough to at least have a shot at trying to compete. Whereas before, they just lacked so many different things that they just weren't really a real deck. What the card is doing is, first, he's giving all of your Blade Beasts some of the basic protections. So they can't be destroyed and they can't be returned to hand. That's just already really good, and we can always add in anti-effect nullification through cards like Sweet Happy Time or Buddy Option. So there's definitely ways of giving him the rest of the protection. Would have been nice if they had it, but what he is giving instead of that is a just static power buff and crit buff. So while he's on the field, he statically gives them, on top of the protections, plus 10,000 power and plus 1 crit. So that's just already pretty good. And then the other ability is doing the other big thing Blade Beasts was lacking, and that was in their consistency tools. So Blade Beasts as a deck just was not a super consistent deck and ran out of gas really, really quickly after you basically floored it. What his stance under the Moonlight ability is doing is when he enters, you get to drop 3 different Japanese blades from your deck, and if there are 5 or more different Japanese blades in your drop zone, you get to gauge 2 and draw 2. That's just really, really big because he just helps set up the fact that Japanese blades want to be in the drop zone, so deck thinning is very, very good. On top of which, it's setting up for your big power plays because a lot of the Japanese blades will want you to have a different amount in order to gain additional effects. So he's just helping out with that. Then he's got Move, Penetrate, Double Attack, and Soul Guard. So he's just looking to be very, very powerful. And right now, the biggest weakness to the Blade Beast deck is the fact that they don't have a way to counter call or size reduce, so that way you could utilize the different Mikazukis, because I think Purple Flash Mikazuki is still really, really good and really, really important, because Purple Flash Mikazuki is where the vast majority of the insane levels of damage output the deck has. But what this Mikazuki is doing is definitely adding a lot more consistency to the Blade Beast deck, and they definitely needed that on top of the basic protections. I'm already testing around with the card and finding some pretty good results, and the deck is already kind of changing, and it looks to be a pretty interesting deck. And then lastly, we have Duel Jaeger Revolted Rebuddy, which he's looking to be pretty decent. Like, some people are kind of underrating him, but the fact that as part of his call cost he nullifies the lifelink of a Dragon Chief Emperor means you could basically just call him on top of literally any Dragon Chief Emperor without worrying about the lifelink effect. But it is important that you still have to have a size 3 Dragon Chief Emperor in order to play him. That's just one thing to keep in mind, but what he's doing is actually really powerful. So if this card is in your center, it can't be rested, and its abilities can't be nullified, and its souls can't be dropped. And you can't take damage by your opponent's card effects. So that's already a lot of basic protections. The only protections he doesn't have is basically being removed from the field. Outside of that, once he sticks, he's looking to stay because of his Soul Guard ability and because the deck naturally just wants to put souls into him. The lack of destruction immunity is kind of understandable because his Soul Guard would just be a little too much on top of all of that. But regardless, like, that's already still pretty powerful. And on top of which, he has a really insane counteract ability where during either player's attack phase, you could pay 1 gauge, and for this turn, the card gets plus 20,000 power and plus 20,000 defense, and this is not a once per turn. So that means essentially for like 3 gauge, you could probably wall out most people out of their combat phase. So you don't even necessarily need to have a solid like defensive spell lineup in order to make the card really, really powerful. Then he's got Penetrate, Quadruple Attack, Soul Guard, and Lifelink Loss. But like the idea is you're going to be calling him on top of a Duel Jaeger with a whole bunch of soul. So that way he just is going to try to stay on the field. And the fact that he has built-in protection from basically attacks is already really, really good. So he definitely is going to be a good inclusion in the deck. And I think the deck is definitely going to change around him, because you could already be like, okay, I'm going to play Tempest, and then Tempest will have 6 cards in its soul, and then you just play this on top of Tempest, and then a lot of them will have abilities that help him from his soul. So he's just looking to be very, very powerful and a very good inclusion in the deck, if not another route for the deck to take. So that's kind of all of the new rebuddies that we got over the past week. Definitely a lot of really powerful cards that are changing the way a lot of these decks are being played, and it's looking to be like it's going to be a very interesting set because of just the sheer broadness of the support it's giving a lot of decks. Right now we don't have any new information about the set other than these new rebuddies. We have about like 25 to 30 about spoiled right now, so I'm still kind of estimating it's going to be about a 50 to 60 card set, and it's going to be nothing but rebuddies. That's just what it's looking like to me, because there's still so many cards confirmed that we don't have effects for, and there's still so many cards that they could use like all of the other Omni Lords. There's just a lot that they can do with the set, and depending on how they take it, it could be really, really good, and seeing how broad it is will definitely shake up the game quite dramatically. With all that being said, feel free to leave a comment about how you're feeling about the Revival Buddy set down in the comments section. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe for more Buddy Fight content, and I will see you in the next video.